Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting of the Council of Committees of the Town of Petawawa to order for February 10th, 2025. Welcome members of council, staff, special guests, and our large studio audience this time. We'll start this meeting off with the reading of the land acknowledgement, and this evening it is Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we gather this evening, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of the Petawawa Town Council and our community that we are meeting on traditional territory of the Omawini Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Omawini people and express our respect and support for the rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years, and we wish to acknowledge our shared responsibilities in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission 94 calls to action. Calls to action number 41. We call upon the federal government in consultation with the Aboriginal organizations to appoint a public inquiry into the causes of remedies for the disproportionate victimization of Aboriginal women and girls. The inquiry mandate would include investigation into missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls, links to the intergenerational legacy of residential schools, recent progress. The Commission of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls delivered its final report reclaiming power and place on June 3rd, 2019. This included 2,386 participants in the truth gathering process, many of whom were survivors of the residential school system. In response to the final report's recommendation on June 3rd, 2021, the Government of Canada, along with its many Indigenous provincial, territorial, municipal partners, released the 2021 Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and 2SLGBTQ People National Action Plan in hopes of ending this systematic system of violence. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ruth. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in any matters? Okay, we have a whole slate of on the agenda this evening, and we're going to start off with our long-awaited Town of Petawawa Fire and Emergency Services Master Plan for 2024. I'll turn it over to Acting Chief Prue to introduce our guest this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, members of council. To my left, I have Guy Gagne from the Emergency Management Group that we've been working with the past year. And it's been an honor to be working with Guy. His credentials are pretty amazing. He has a lot of knowledge from the fire service and taught us a lot about our department and how we operate. So Guy has been with the Solicitor General's office for 32 years. 10 of those years was with the Ontario Provincial Police, and 22 years with the Ontario Fire Marshal's office. He was an investigator. He was a supervisor for investigators and a manager for the field advisory team, the OFM. He was the principal and instructor and a manager of the Ontario Fire College. He was a certified firefighter, fire prevention officer, training officer, and fire investigator. He graduated from Western University, York University, and Nipissing University, and retired and then joined the EMG and been working with them for the past 3 years. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Guy to start the community risk assessment. Oh, before I start, sorry, Guy. We're going to look at presenting these two documents, and then I'll put together an implementation plan with my team, and we'll bring in the bring it for approval of the high priorities to the lowest priorities with the recommendation of these two plans. So, Guy.
Okay, we'll be able to do the presentation on. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, councillors. Thank you very much for having me tonight here on behalf of Emergency Management Ontario. On behalf of Emergency Management Group. I was with them with too long the other group, so I must apologize. So we'll be talking a little bit. We were asked to complete the community risk assessment and also a fire master plan. So I'll have two short presentations. We're just giving you an overview of the two programs and some of the findings. And then if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer some of the questions you may have. We'll start with the community risk assessment that was prepared. Part of the team, obviously, I worked as the lead on this project. Then I worked also with others. I worked with Craig Ankyo. Craig Ankyo was a retired chief of Thunder Bay, who's been one of the consultants that worked with us. There was also Dan Hefferton. You may have known Dan, was military, and he was working with us on the EM side of it, doing emergency management and exercises. So I know he has worked with you in the past as doing some exercises for your community. And also, we had Rick Moultman. Rick Moultman worked with me also, and Rick, in fact, is the creator of the community risk assessment. He was with Barrie for 42 years. Retired as a deputy chief from Barrie, and pretty much specialized, was in charge of the prevention side of the business in Barrie. And so he took on for us at the company to work mostly on the community risk assessments and developing community risk assessment for the province, and for the municipality, and also for the fire services. So on the side of the community risk assessment, the first slide. Again, just as an understanding, and that comes out of the recommendations of which is part of the regulation that was passed in 2018, which is regulation 378, that requires municipalities to have a community risk assessment that they have to have. It came into effect in 2019, but we have 5 years to be able to, for the municipalities to be able to prepare their document. So July 1st, 2024 was kind of the time to be able to have your community risk assessment. That being said, you're not late. What happens is, as long as it was in progress as of July 1st, 2024, a lot of municipalities in Ontario, their CRA is in progress. The CRA has to be reviewed annually, so the documentation that you receive, you're part of the CRA. We do ask that this is there's elements of it that comes from the emergency management, that comes from the HIRA, which is your hazard assessment, risk assessment, from your hazard identification risk assessment. And under the EMCP, the Act, the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, some of the elements in the CRA talks about your infrastructure, talks about some of the risk that is internal aspects that should be kept confidential as much as we can. So we do mention that this is a document. The Fire Master Plan is a public document that is more than willing for the town, and also to be able to be posted as you wish and you're willing. We do not recommend as much as for the community risk assessment due to some of the sensitive elements of it. Obviously, it's over 300 and some pages, so I have to be able to go through it. We won't go through it tonight. We're just going to be going through some highlights of the documents. The document has to be reviewed every 5 years. You need to be aware also that every 5 years, the document has to be updated and reviewed. It has to be at least an annual logging, or a log of it has been reviewed and looked at if there's any changes. If there's no major changes, then it waits the 5 years to be able to have the document reviewed. Sorry, next slide, thank you. Again, this is based, the risk assessment is looking at the risk, to be able to identify the risk, to be able to evaluate the risk, and to be able to recognize the risk and implementing process on different elements of it. So the document is based on the what we call the public safety, the 3 lines of defense, which is based on the public education, safety and standard enforcement, and also we call the suppression of the emergency response, which is really the suppression aspect of fire. The 4th elements that we also included, that we also deal with, is the emergency aspect of the emergency management process. Next page, thank you. Again, there's 9 profile under the regulation that we have to go through, and we have to also design it, and we have to develop. The document that you have, the 300 and some pages, is a document that is approved by the Fire Marshal, by the Office of the Fire Marshal under the regulation. The format has to be approved by the Fire Marshal. So the information and the format is formats that we have consulted with them, and it's a document that is approved by the Office of the Fire Marshal. We deal with the geographic profile, the building profile, your critical infrastructure profile, demographic profile of the community, hazard profiles that you have, technological hazards, natural hazards, different elements of it, which is really the hierarchy from the emergency management. And also the public safety response, community services profile, which is the NGO, which is the non-governmental agencies or offices like Red Cross and different organizations that you work with in your municipality. There's also the economical profile that we looked at, and also past loss and history of. So we look at the fire histories. We use the information from these SIR, which is called Standard Incident Report. Under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, the municipality must report the fires to the fire marshal, the fire chief, and it's done through what we call Standard Incident Report. And these incident reports are the data that we have access to through the Office of the Fire Marshal to assist on looking at your history of a fire response, emergency call response times. Next page, thank you. Again, when we do the analysis and we review and evaluation, it's based on the risk, probability, and consequences. We look at how often it will happen. It doesn't happen at all. It can happen quite regularly. And also we looked at the consequences. Is it insignificant or is it catastrophic? So from that aspect, everything is based on the whole document that you receive because we need to prioritize the risk. It's prioritized by high, medium, or low risk. So this is the aspects for you to be able to assist and to work with you as to what is prioritized. And from there, where you can develop what we call the CR, which is a community risk reduction plan that we build from this. And by doing this, we meet the requirements of the Act and the requirements of the regulation. Identify treatments and options for the risk. Again, in every single one, we talk about, are we avoiding the risk? Are we going to mitigate the risk? Are we going to accept the risk? Are we going to transfer the risk? So the consultant that worked with this, that looks at all the different profiles, identified the risk on all these aspects of mitigation or the treatment options, is also associated where we advise and we give how should it be treated if it's a question of avoiding that risk, or mitigating the risk, accepting or transferring the risk. We avoid, we're not doing anything about it. We mitigate the risk as we identify programs or initiatives to deal with it. Accept the risk is that there's no specific programs that will be implemented, but we are aware of that risk. And the other one is transfer the risk, is knowing that sometimes there's other agencies or we can transfer that risk to someone else. And depending on the risks that are identified, we assist on what is the treatment options that we recommend. Risk summary. So when we looked at it, again, we just look at some, and here what I did is mostly we looked at that. You'll see that the slide has different color, and I apologize. I mean, I'll be AODA in its approach to the slide system, but the color system is that red is for the high risk, and then you'll see after that kind of an orange or the orange light, where we're talking about a medium risk, and the green light, which will be the low risk. So when we look at hazardous material incidents, is one of the aspects of it of responding to hazmat elements of it. We know that the fire service, the town of Petawawa Fire and Emergency Services, they respond to hazmat incidents at the operation levels. The lack of equipment to mitigate all chemical related incidents. So there's required a lot of equipment depending on what the incidents can be. And in the evaluation of the CRE, we looked at talking with some stakeholders, talking with the fire department, identified if all the aspects is there, if we have a complete aspects, if we can mitigate the elements at the operation level of all different type of scenes that we may have. On that aspect of it, the mitigation strategy that we looked is pretty much a transfer of the duty of the risk by looking at entering into an agreement with a third party at the technician level. The reason for that aspect of it is that when we look at the regulations, because there's a new regulation, the regulation that was passed in 2022 about firefighter certification. If you do have your core services at the technician level, that means that by 2028, July 1st, 2028, all your staff will have to be trained, or the teams that are identified will have to be trained to the technician level. It becomes quite, when we look at sustainability and price, it is your decisions to, if that's the direction you're taking, but it's quite involved in these aspects of doing that. With at the level of equipment, at the level of training, to be able to meet the standard and then to maintain that standard. Body of water, so another risk that was identified in the CRA, the Community Risk Assessment, was your bodies of water. The fact that you have the Ottawa and the Petawawa rivers that run through the town, and the elements that some of the community events that you have in town, the people that are using the waterways, the aspects of it, there's still elements of it. And there's also the issue of water, of fast water. Fast water under the standards that we use and we refer to, which is the National Fire Protection Association, identifies swift water as one knot. So it doesn't have to be too fast to become fast water and moving water. And then there's the special training that is required as to surface water, non-movement water, and swift water. We have different levels and different technical rescuer level of training that is required for the different aspects of what water conditions we're dealing with. And again, in Ontario, it came down to also the two fatalities that we had to do, especially with the movement of the water and also the force of the water. Both, unfortunately, incidents in training situation, but it is a high-risk aspect of the water. They are trained at the technician level for the water here at your fire department, which is also, like we said, we talked about the water and the risk associated with it. Your ENR bylaw does reflect technical rescuer core services, and here the issue is that we have to make sure that since the 2022 regulation, that's a regulation of fire service, and I know that you're updating your bylaw, your fire services bylaw, but your core service should be very much iterated or very much described in your document as to what level. Otherwise, you fall into, are you a technician or not, and how much money and what level you are, and the question about where are you fitting into this. And so we certainly are encouraging the municipalities that in reviewing their what you call it, enabling and regulating bylaws for the fire service is to absolutely describe properly your level of service that you're providing, so that it will be very clear if it's at the awareness level, at the operations level, or at the technician level. So that's very important to be able to identify what especially with the technical rescue work. There are all kind of different levels also, depending on suppressions, depending on all your core services that you're offering, that with the new regulations, you have to make sure that you will train to the level that you are indicating in your bylaw. If it's not clear in your bylaw, you may fall into a higher level and it will require a more extensive training to maintain that level. Because there might be a discussion with the province of Ontario, the fire marshal, what they identify from reading your bylaw and what is their interpretation of your core services that you're offering. Mitigation strategy, as I said, is to update your policies and to update your documents. So when we looked at it and we did a review, we do a thorough review of all aspects. We do believe that by updating your policy, your SOG, and also the training and equipment, the same as the hazmat, you would be able to meet whatever your level of core services of your level of service that you will be providing to that level. Next page, thank you. Fire protection, another area that we looked at. And then daytime availability, the fire protection is mostly the suppression aspect, is response, is being able to respond. So one of the elements is daytime availability when we looked at it. Doing very good with your platoon systems where weekend and after hours. The issue was with the daytime response. There's certain requirements, and we'll be talking about it into the fire master plan that we use. Again, the National Fire Protection Associations are very good practices. They're not laws, but they're great guidelines, and they're also identified as best practices. They're made by our peers, the peers of the fire service, that meet regularly to update and to create these standards that establish the knowledge requisite and skill requisites for all the different functions of the fire service. When it comes to the fire protection aspects, there's a standard that is applied directly to a response for your type of municipality, depending on your population density, and it's called the NFPA standard 1720. And this standard is looked at it by saying that the size of your municipality, you're recognized as being a rural area, as a demand zone. And in that demand zone, you should have at least 6 people responding in 14 minutes. So this is when we look at daytime response, and we looked at this, generally speaking, we just are giving you our recommendation saying what it should be the best practice in response. Mitigation, again, is to increase the staffing level for the daytime availability. Again, the Fire Master Plan will assist you with some options how to do this, but here in the CRE is looking at risk. When we look at that profile, we look at the aspects that there is a risk of an issue, right now high risk of your daytime response. Tiered medical response, again, the town of Petawawa Fire and Emergency Services does not respond to medical calls. It's not part of your core services in your bylaw. So at this point, again, it's just an issue that should there's any assistance, is it working properly, DMS, is there an issue? We identify that as a possibility of an issue and a risk of what services and not having a tiered response to medical calls. And again, the mitigation strategies to reevaluate and consider inclusion of the core services into your ENR bylaw, just to consider maybe having a certain way of doing tiered response. Technical rescue, again, here it's into the yellow color, and again, it's a moderate, it's not as high. So when you look at priority aspects, when you come to technical rescue, here are all the other rescue that falls, like your ice, your water rescue. There's other aspects of rescue, your motor vehicle rescue, or different aspects of it. So we'll look specifically at all the different aspects of your technical rescue. The current response is to the technical rescue emergencies is at the technician level. Under the regulation, like as I mentioned, 343.22, you will be required to be also trained to the technician level for all the core rescue. We know with the due diligence of your fire service and working with the chief and the deputy chief that you are training to the technician level. You're not certified to the technician level. So that's the elements here of us putting this in a yellow color here of the moderate aspect of it. So, and the other aspect of it is one of the mitigation is depending if you want to offer the core services, or if you want to make sure that, again, same as your hazmat is going with an MOU with a third-party agency that provides the service. We see that quite a bit on different aspects of doing it or using different agencies. In this Simcoe County, for instance, area, just an example, pretty much the whole county is using Barrie as pretty much the place where all responses, Barrie comes. They have an MOU with Barrie that provide automatic aid service for all their technical rescue instead of spending quite a bit of resources into building technical programs. So we're giving you options and giving you ideas. We put this in the categories that right now people are trained on service at this level, and maybe you should consider doing it, or to look at possibilities around the county, around Renfrew County, as to see who's offering the service, or shared services. Shared services with the garrison. The garrison has technical rescue depending on, and maybe an MOU that is a little bit more elaborated on technical rescue. Another risk is fire apparatus that we looked at. Again, at this level here, it's a moderate or medium risk. The town of Petawawa is experiencing intensification and growth through a medium density dwellings. Your growth strategy is developing. You're having some property here, talking with the planning that we're developing. We call intensification or density, medium and high density. Again, medium density under the standard is maybe 50 units per hectare. per square hectare, where the high densities are 75. So there's standards that pretty much are saying what would be a low, medium, or high density. In this aspect here, if you have medium density or buildings, some apartment buildings, and the aspect of it is that every story requires at least 13 feet, we call that. So if you're going to build a 4-story, for instance, and some property here that 4-story, 4 times 13 is a little bit more than your 35-foot ladder that you have available right now. So it creates a little bit of a risk issue on aspects of that. So for that aspect of it, in mitigation here, we're saying we can do something about it. If the growth, and especially if you're going to keep on growing, and if we are keeping with the momentum, especially government requirements are expanding and growing, and if you're going medium and high density, there should be a certain consideration as to getting an aerial equipment to be able to perform that. 105-foot aerial will probably take you for the next, under the standards of vehicles are good for 30 years, but 20 years, 15 years replacement, and then 20 years. So at least I would say 20 years it will give you, at least for the apparatus. Another element we looked at is your fire inspections. Again, these are part of the profile. If you look, it will be identified with a different aspect of profiles here. The fire inspections here falls under one of the profiles. The Petawawa is of a size and has a building stock that requires a robust fire inspection program. Again, there are standards that talks about frequencies or inspection frequencies. FUS, which is the fire underwriter surveys, provide a certain table of frequencies of fire inspection frequencies. The National Fire Protection Association's standard 1730 also provide with an idea of certain frequencies of how many times we should be doing. We evaluated about 200, and we have a lot more than this, but right now the fire services do about 237 structure or dwellings or type of buildings that they do inspection on. Obviously, when you look at your building stock, there's a lot more buildings than that. So to be able to do program properly, and your inspection is done on a yearly process. So we recommend that with the number of buildings that you have, instead of trying to cram all the inspection in 1 year, to look at schedules that follows the NFPA standard or the FUS standard, which is basically high risk again. You do it annually, medium risk, they're done biannually, and low risk triannually. So it's not to doing all the inspection in 1 year. There's elements, these are best practice, or they are accepted best practice. So they're recognized, and it provides due diligence by using these. And they are, like I said, it's the organizations that we work with that have developed these standards to provide you with some ideas of what type of inspection schedules you may have. Next page. The fire prevention focus of the UFM was the first 2 lines of defense, which is the public education and also the safety and fire standard and enforcement. Right now, your system is based on request and complaint for the inspection. You do have a schedule where you have a diligence system that the fire department has built of doing annual inspections. The other inspection, there's also a bulk of these inspections that you're doing that are based on request and complaint. On that aspect of it, the fire service needs a robust public education program with the goals of having a fire service safety committee to reduce the incidence of fire. So again, we look at the number of inspections. For what we look here, it's low risk. You do have a program in place. The issue is that the programs that you have, they do spend a lot of time on inspection, and what is put aside is mostly the public education. We find out from our analysis that if there's something that has to be put aside, it tends to be the public education side of the business because we're very busy. So we're saying that there should be a robust program. We should have a program of public education, and it should be incorporated into our inspections, into what is required, so that we can identify where are the risks and develop program accordingly to that risk for your public education. The other aspect is that we look at, we call it public education, just to assist the community and the people in town, is to be able to identify the document or the section as risk reductions. So we're seeing a lot more changes right now. Instead of public education, we're calling about risk reduction programs instead of public education. So then we have a community risk reduction outreach program. A lot of municipalities are going for that as a name instead of the fire inspection or divisions. They're looking at more as a community risk reduction outreach programs. Again, we talked about the program. We talked about the NFP 1730 and the fuzz that I talked about. These are our documents that will assist you in how to establish fire inspection frequency schedules. Building stock. The issues of residential intensification. There's also a second suite and short-term accommodations, which is a recent phenomenon. We're very familiar with this. There's a new mandatory requirements also in identifying the number of each occupancy based on the Ontario Building Code for the lightweight construction. So that's the other aspect. So there's a new regulation that says all the lightweight construction should be identified. Short-term accommodation should be identified. So we're putting this as yellow risk that we should have a way of starting to be able, as the fire service or as a municipality, to be able to have a way of identifying and being able to maybe have a registry in aspects of these accommodations, these businesses, and to know where they are, and also for safety aspect. Recently in Montreal, where 7 people died in the short-term accommodations, we're seeing more and more of that's going on. Go into a place, you don't know where the smoke alarms are, if it's working properly, or you don't have an escape plan for that place. You're just going there for a week vacation or 2 weeks vacation. But the reality is that the kids might be in the basement right now. So we need to know how to escape. Mitigation strategies, you're having, for instance, a bylaw, a short-term accommodation bylaw. If you're creating something, more municipalities are starting to create that. These people are creating, if you go at Air DNA, you can see all the different businesses, where they are and how much. And if you want to start your own Airbnb, they give you the whole profile of how much it costs and how much revenue you'll be generating. These places are doing $20 to $40 to even $60,000 a year. So right now, there's we never talk about revenue generation as we talk about cost recovery. If you're doing inspection on this, they're making good money. They should be paying for at least a safety aspect done to it. And the aspect of it is to be able to have a bylaw that covers all the inspections, depending on how many you have in your municipality and in your area. If you have a fair number of them, it's could pay for a fire inspection, a fire inspector. Just the fact of cost recovery on that. It's cost recovery. They're making big monies, and we're seeing more and more of that happening in municipalities. We talk about cost recovery. The Fire Protection and Prevention Act, section part 8, talks about recovery of costs. It's never about making money, and that's the biggest issue that we have with this fire service. Is right now is the hesitations of laying charges or to do the work because we think it's revenue generation. It's absolutely not revenue generation. It's cost recovery for the service that's being provided. And that's an element that's important to mention. Again, we talk here, the mitigation for the short suite, it should give you a tool to be able to have a registry of these businesses in municipality. At the same time, to do regular inspections. When we do inspections, we can then put our smoke alarm program in places. So that's the issue of it. Thank you very much. So these are the ones that we have identified. This very specifically, they're all the different, there's the 9 profile, there's others. These are mostly the higher priorities I wanted to mention to your group. Reading the whole document, you will identify all the different ones. And again, you will see that we have a treatment options that we'll be providing for every single one of them to assist you. Where we go from there with this document, we always say that we should have a community risk reduction plan that is developed from it. So that the document doesn't sit on a shelf. We just recommend that we look at a community risk reduction plan on the programs to identify, obviously, because we have to identify the risk. And it's also part of the regulation 378-18, where you need to prioritize your risk and identify and also prioritize your risk. DOFM, for that purpose, the Office of the Fire Marshal, is creating a dashboard. If you're familiar with it, it's the Community Fire Risk Reduction Dashboard. And again, it's assisting the fire services to be able to identify, put them in the system. It's a little system to assist you at developing what programs you have, what risk, what levels, what we have done from it, So they have created a tool to assist the municipalities with the community risk. They put a regulation that you should have a community risk assessment. So they're now assisting you with also a dashboard for your community risk reduction program or plan. Again, in conclusion, real fast, we would just like to thank the Town of Petawawa Fire and Emergency Services to assisting us with doing this. And we also understand the professionalism of the departments. We spoke with members at all different levels. We spoke with stakeholders. It's part of our programs to get as much information as we can. And obviously, we just commend the professionalism of the Town of Petawawa Fire and Emergency Services. We would also like to assist everybody that assists us in the development of the community risk assessment. Me directly, but this is Rick Mogman that's been doing all the work on it. That certainly would like to appreciate and would like to give his thanks for everyone that assisted in the development of the community risk assessment. Last of it, Rick Mogman, there's the information that we provide also for you. If there is any question on this, I gave you my business card. You can also contact me. I'm very familiar with the document. But like I said, the creator of this document is Rick Mogman, and you can provide more detailed information on all aspects of the document. Thank you. That's the first part.
That's only the first part. Well, thank you very much, Keith, to you and your team for working with our fire department and getting our community risk assessment completed. I'm glad we're not in the in-progress mode anymore, like some of the other municipalities, but it is complete. And I think it's an important project that you've undergone here. It'll all help make our community safer, depending on what we can do based on our needs and our budgetary requirements. But it's great to have this done. I almost feel like we should get a letter grade now at the end. Like, Petawawa, you have scored a B+. A-, and then have us compared with what you've seen in some of the other municipalities. But it's great to see all of this come out, and I'll open it up to questions or comments from members of council. Councillor Kermit.
Thank you very much, Guy and Craig and Jamie, for coming to provide us this information tonight. And I was very happy, Craig, to hear you say that it's the intent to come up with a work plan to, to put some of this in a nutshell and have a path forward for implementing a lot of this, because there's a lot of it that is very low cost, high value stuff that can be changed. So or can be implemented, I should say. So it's great to have that work plan going forward, and happy to see this document released, and it gives us a great path forward for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Beacon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank you sincerely for this document and for the way that you've arranged sort of decision points for us, because it's clearly one to prioritize safety, but there's also considerations when it comes to assuring that our firefighters are well served and well outfitted and are not overworked or overtasked, etc. So finding that balance going forward, I really appreciate how rich this information was. I learned a ton. So sincere thank you, and sincere thank you to every member of the fire department. I think I was impressed by you before, but then after having read this and understanding what it is to do this job, I really do appreciate it, and I hope our residents understand how much you do for us. So thank you.
Councillor Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank everyone who partook in this, and it's a very good working document. It's great. I like to hear the comments about the reviews fees and the recovery guidelines, and the new equipment opportunities, and what's facing us in the future. This plan here gives us a chance, when I was reading everything, it's a chance to reflect on how far we've come and where we're going. And this document really gives us a good vision for our future here to provide to our residents. So thank you for all the work and everything. I know it's taken time, but it's a very detailed document, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of this and how we move forward. So thank you so much.
Any further questions or comments? I just have one quick question, and I agree with Councillor Carmody. It's great to hear that we're going to formulate a plan going forward with everything graded in terms of highest to lowest needs. At the end, it was mentioned about a community risk reduction plan. So I'm assuming that's separate from the report that you're going to bring forth. Is that something we would do internally, or does that type of plan have to be done by a consultant?
So we would do that internally. We do have our finger on the pulse with this. It's a big portion of our fire prevention team, and it's a matter of sitting down with the team and looking at what we can accomplish with the amount of staff that we have. We've increased our fire prevention team recently, which we're getting positive numbers, and you can see through the monthly reports that we provided in the past that we've had quite a bit of inspections completed, and we're seeing our fires at a low at this time. But yeah, we would be working in-house to develop that plan.
Thanks for that, Greg. Anything further? Okay, I'd just like to say it was, and I know we've got a whole other piece coming, but this community risk assessment was a great exercise, and it's great to see, you know, what our fire department is. And I think this exercise is a great indication of where we're going to be in the future in terms of keeping our community safe. Okay, so if there's nothing further, we're going to move on to stage 2.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The second part is the fire master plan that we did. The fire master plan, in fact, requires the community risk assessment. It's nice that you took the initiative of looking at doing both documents, because often when we do a fire fire master plan, we do look at the elements. Again, we have to look at the risk and stuff. A lot of the elements identified in risk when we do. So they're very extensive, looking at the 9 different profiles. We built pretty much on the community risk assessment to develop a fire master plan. So great when you spell you have these documents. Not it's a lot easier, but it's definitely a base and it's a foundations to be able to build on the fire master plan. So there will be elements of it that are very similar. If you read if you read the documents, you will identify elements and say, geez, this is something that, yes, it will be absolutely same elements and same recommendation and elements that we looked at for the fire service. Their 10-year plan that we're providing, we're looking at also looking at different elements of your economics, of your profile, of looking at demographics, looking at response time, looking at equipment, looking at facilities. We look at all the different elements, very similar to the profiles that we look in the community risk assessment, to also now specifically deal with the fire service and now their operations. So this is more of an operational and a strategic document about fire protection services. So as part of the first slide, thank you very much. When we look at the scope of the work, is again, like you say, we had the 9 profiles. Here we look at all aspects of the fire service. It's an operational document looking at the governance, you know, at your different bylaws you may have, or other bylaws that associated, like your development charges or your fees and charges bylaws. Looking at your burn permit bylaws. We look at all aspects that pertains to fire protection services. Administration, we look at the administration of the service. We look at the type of organization, the org chart, what it looks like, the personnel, how many personnel, what divisions you have in place. We look at all aspects of the administration of the departments. Human resources, we looked at, again, staffing is a big element based on a lot of standards where we need a certain number of people to respond to fire. And so we do look at the human resources aspect of it, of the departments, and we'll talk more in detail on some aspect of the standards that it requires for low hazard, medium hazard, high hazard, how many people should respond. Most of the response that we'll talk about will be based on a standard residential home, 2,000 square feet. residential home. But again, if we're talking now about apartment buildings, then there's all the standard specifically talks about what are the different functions, how many personnel you should have, and what personnel should be responding to medical calls. So it's part of the standards of deployment and operations. We look at the facilities. We look at also the structure, the facility, the locations. We do location analysis. We use GIS analysis and response time. We use some algorithm that looks at the streets to look at the directions, how fast, what is the speeds of travels on the roads. So we use all artificial intelligence to evaluate response time based on artificial intelligence, and also based on the data, as I mentioned, the OFM data that is reported. And we look at your call times, your drive times, your response times, to be able to evaluate the adequacy of the response of the fire service, when it's specifically in this instance for emergency response, because obviously we have different departments where emergency response is not as required for inspection levels or public education, so different aspects. We have different criteria that we're using to evaluate them. We look also at training and education. Again, as we mentioned earlier, your core services, what your programs are, what is your training departments, how you're training, what training delivery, what standard are you using if you are following any standards. We evaluate all elements of your training, the service level standards and response data. We spoke about that. The fire prevention and public education, your inspections, your building stock again, that comes back. That's how many building you have. We also do a review of emergency planning. As we said, we have the 3 lines of defense. We also look at the 4th one, the 4th pillar, which is emergency management. So we look at your elements because a lot of the fire services, there are a direct and indirect relationship with emergency management. So we look at some aspects of that. As to your emergency operations center, where they're located, if they have all the requirements, if they have redundancy attached to it. So we look at that aspect. So it's all part of that emergency or response that we look at. Financial implications, we do understand the financial aspects, Mayor, as you mentioned, as we look at sustainability. We don't look at trying to present recommendation or ideas that just doesn't make sense. So we look at also at the fiscality. We have to look at the budget. We look at about how much revenue is generated, what is the tax base, what is the levy, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. We don't, so all that are elements that will be compounded as factors in our evaluations and our recommendations, building up recommendations on the 5-step plan. Fire protection, automatic mutual aid agreements. We also look at different agreements that you may have with surrounding agencies. So this is an aspect that we also evaluate, because response can also be based on automatic aids, because when we evaluate your quality of response, if you have an automatic aid, then it comes into an effect. The mutual aid has a different factor that is compounded into it that we put in evaluations. Mutual aid is not there to use if people don't meet the minimum requirement of response, and if they're using mutual aid, you're using mutual aid for the wrong reasons. Our evaluation is not based on that. So that's what we mean by looking at your programs, your evaluations, and how you are utilizing the different programs. Dispatch communication system, we look at that too. See the health and safety aspects, what communication, what dispatch, what is your PSA or your point of your first point of contact to be able to do dispatching the call, who's getting the information, where it's coming from, and who is the dispatching entity, what equipment that is being used. We evaluate all that in the evaluation of your communication system. And we review the community risk profile. So like I said, it's very important to look at your profile. You had a CRA, we did the CRA, so we had an advantage of having a very good understanding. Otherwise, we do a full review of the community risk assessment if it's done by a third-party organization or if it's done internally. Next page, thank you. Some of the benefits, again, will give you a clearer vision of what the future need is for the fire service. This is a long-term plan. So our evaluation of it, the recommendations, just like we talk about the treatment options for the CRA. In this instance here, we talk about immediate, which is 0 to 1 year, short-term, which is 1 to 3 years, mid-term, which is 4 to 7 years, or long-term. So we also here evaluate about prioritizing, and we set some of the recommendations that will be based on something that you should do now, or something that at least within the next 10 years should be done. So, again, a guide to include options and budgetary estimates for implementation. So our master plan should be a document, excuse me, talk too much. That's the problem of being French. Again, we looked at the different elements of it, and we looked at budgetary estimates. So we will also give you an idea of what we are looking at and all the options that we budget. So we provide options that will give you an array or certain aspects of how much to be spending, and we look also what should be and give you options on budgetary elements of it. For sustainability, again, prioritizing of each project. So the whole plans allows you here to be able to prioritize. These are recommendations. The fire master plan, there's a misconception that, oh, this is a document, we have to accept the whole thing. No, these were, the fire master plan is this the 10-year plan, and we need to decide where we need to be going and which one, and we prioritize and how we will be doing it. So the recommendations are there to assist you into building that. So in this master plan. The ability to communicate with staff, internal and external stakeholder about the goal of the future. Again, this document gives you that opportunity to be able to, as you mentioned, Councillor, about educating the general public about where we're going and why we're going in that direction. So, next page. Through doing all this, we do research gathering and information, we do data analysis, and then we create recommendations. We do consultations. We did a consultation. We did a survey with the community. We did also survey with the councillors and the administration staff. We also did with the staff, the fire services, the service staff. It is important to gather the information. We are as good as the information that's being gathered, and sometimes they may identify elements that we haven't touched on and say, well, wait a minute, I need to discuss, I need to look a little bit more into this. So it is important to have this conversation. All the data gathering, and then we use standards, we use information. All the recommendations are evidence-based. So this is not something that you will see that every single recommendation, every aspect of the document is based on best practice, is based on standards, is based on authoritative documents, and also it is evidence-based. It's based on the research that we've done and looking at your performance as a fire service and where you're going, looking at your demographic, your changes. As long as your strategic plan of intensification is still in place, as long as everything we talk about is in place, then we will put this document together. These are the recommendations we made. If you make any changes to this, well, that will change the direction you're going. The document is as good as what we went through for the last year, and the document that we've been using to develop this, the information that we utilized to develop this document. Next, thank you very much. Again, this is the consultations, as we mentioned. We did a community survey, a staff survey. We did also the council members survey. We talked to department heads. We talked to staff. We talked to senior management. We talked to the different divisions, suppression staff. We talked with union representative. We spoke with prevention side of the business. We public education. We had interview and consultation with all the different groups and gathered information also from, as I mentioned, your standard incident report with the OFN. So getting the information from them. Same models that we talked about earlier has been used, the same as the CRA. There's word identification. We always use the whole model of looking at it is under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, Section 2, 2A and 2.1A and 2.1B, that talks about the municipal responsibility of having a fire department, of providing public education, of being able to provide some enforcement, and to having fire services that will offer fire protection. So that's your core services. So we align all that together to be able to identify where you are and if you're offering all the elements that is required under law, under regulations, and under legislations. To complete this document, as we talked about the data gathering of all the information you had and where the authoritative document comes from, this is give you a little bit of the list of what we look at. Obviously, Fire Protection and Prevention Act, make sure we adhere to the law, the provincial law. We also look to the guidelines, the OFM guidelines, the directives that are provided by the Office of the Fire Marshal, the public safety directives, guidelines that are created by the Office of the Fire Marshal. We also look at the National Fire Protection Association. These are guidelines, they're not laws. However, some of these are put into law. For instance, when they created regulation 343, which is the firefighter certification, right in the regulation, it mentioned the NFPA professional qualification standards. Well, guess what? Now these are becoming laws, because it says that you shall be trained to the NFPA, for instance, as a firefighter, NFPA 1001. So they are guidelines until they are put into laws. And sometime under regulation, under legislations, they can be put into laws. We see this in the fire code for sprinkler systems, and where they have to adhere to NFPA standards, and there's all kind of different standards. For instance, your hydrants, they have to adhere to the NFPA 291. It's right in law that under Section 6 of the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, or the Fire Code, sorry, pretty much 6.6 says that you need to adhere to be able to color or code your hydrants the way you have them done here, certain ways, and they have to be tested, they have to be maintained regularly, and you have to do this under the NFPA 291. So then that NFPA becomes more than just a guideline. It's more that it has to be adhered to. We use also the Commission on Fire Accreditation International. It's a highly regarded association, peer review of being able to evaluate. The Fire Master Plan process that EMG utilizes the same breakdowns of the section as the CFAI, the Commissioner on Fire Accreditation International. We use very similar, very highly regarded ways of accrediting and also to be evaluate the fire the Fire Master Plan or a fire service. We also work with the recommendation of the fire underwriter surveys. For instance, when we look at vehicle replacement schedules, we use the fire underwriter surveys. When we look at the different aspects of fire inspections, we use this standard to be able to look at what type of inspection schedule you're using, if you're using any, and we make recommendations based on these very authoritative and accepted documents. Occupational Health and Safety Act, obviously, it is responsible under 25(2)K of the municipality to train their employees. So as an employer, so we look at that aspect. It's all the documents that we looked at in the training, in what training you offer. If you are maintaining the training, we use the standards and the Occupational and Safety Act to make sure that. And as part of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Ministry of Labor Section 21 Committee. Section 21 says that organizations can provide with the minister recommendations on practices, of best practices. There is a fire Section 21, the same as policing has a Section 21 committee, where the peers of the policing tell the Minister of Labor what is good and how we should do best practices. And we do the same for the fire side of it. There's a Section 21, which is members of the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs, the Ontario Professional Firefighter Associations, the Ontario Association of Fire groups. So there's different association, different groups, and also the OFM that we are part of that Section 21, where we look at best practices and all different functions of the fire services. How you maintain your equipment, how you clean your equipment, how many people should be into an apparatus, all the best practices for health and safety elements. We have a committee, so all the Section 21 guidance notes are referred, and we use them to look at some of your programs, some of your elements, see if you adhere to them, and if not, we make recommendations. And again, there's also other industry best practice, like the NIOSH aspect of it on fire suppressions. So we just use all kind of different elements of research, DNRC, whatever is done on fire protection services. We will use these documents to assist on evaluating your service and making recommendations. So Our recommendation, as I said, they're based on the data we obtained at the time, and our recommendations are evidence-based recommendations. The recommendations, again, we talked about all the different aspects of your document that you have, the thorough document. That's a total of 71 recommendations that we have made as in short-term, long-term document for the next 10 years as the fire master plan. Some of these are operational, as Councillor Carmody had mentioned earlier, like some can be done right away, very low cost associated with them. We call them operational. So often we say staff time, and we recommend short term, and we call it mostly staff time is our operational recommendations. The other ones are, the other recommendations are more long term, and they're more strategic operations. Again, the strategic operation, for instance, strategically of acquiring an aerial device, well, it's $1.5 million, these devices. So it's a strategic elements of it. There's a tremendous cost associated with it. Next slide. The recommendations, again, when we look at your response, adequacy response, and your programs that you have and what core services, all that is also based on the census. So we look at the 21, the most recent census, and so Census Canada, and we look also at your population density, and we look at this element. Based on the standard, and like I said, NFP 1720 is a standard that applies directly to composite and volunteer fire services. That is not a career fire service. So you're not a career fire service. You fall under the definition of a volunteer or composite fire service. And for that reason, it falls under the NFPA. So the best practice is the NFPA 1720. Under that, you are what we call a rural area as a demand zone. And again, you can have more than one demand zone, but your whole area is pretty much one demand zone. We don't have a multiple demand zone. So that being said, when we look at the best practice, adequate response, we look at a minimum of 6 staff in 14 minutes, 80% of the time. So it doesn't have to be all the time. We calculate everything using the 80 percentile. So we say that 80% of the time. So that means 20% of the time you can be out of that. You can be outside of that. But we're looking at what is 80% of the time. Are you responding within a certain time? So that will be the criteria that we'll be using based on your population densities in working this document. Again, when we look at the different aspects of the percentiles here, we know that when we look at your calls from, again, looking at all the data, the information that we have, and we look at your response time, staff-wise, you're doing very well. The department's great, kudos, and we commend your staff, the Town of Petawawa Fire and Emergency Services, their dedication to service. You do have your 80% time. You have more than your 6%. You can see you always have 7, 8, 7. So you always have a good average of people that are responding to your calls. You meet your minimum of 6 required to respond to a call. That being said, very fast, just so you understand, when we say 6, the reality is that there should be 2 people in, 2 people out, so in case they go inside, you need 2 people to be able to get them out. You need to have 1 command person, and you should have 1 person operating the pumper, because you need water. So that's what is based. The standard is based. When we say 6, they're really the requirement minimum of any standard. The one we showed earlier is 6, because basically, if you are to enter a property, or if you're going to do a rescue or any assistance, we base it on high incident and high hazard, which is a fire. So the bottom line, we're not saying about a medical response. We're talking about a residential fire. Or if you have a high intensity or incident based, you should have at least 6 people. We call it the buddy system. There should always 2 going in. There should be 2 outside if there's any issue to assist. You should have 1 person that runs the show, and you should have 1 person that provides water. Because most of the time in fires, we're using a suppression water. Recommendations, basically just fast looking at some of the elements of recommendations. Administration. When we look at your administration, again, we talked about your CRA, you have it in place. As mentioned, Mr. Mayor, doing a community risk reduction plan it's one of also recommendations. As part of your CI, you should develop internally. That's something that is developed mostly internally, based on the priority and the characterizations of high, medium, and low risk. One of the aspects that we look to is to hire an additional full-time administrative assistant. So we're just saying full-time, whatever you want to go. The bottom line is that clerical elements is something that's always underestimated. So in this instance here, you do have right now one staff that is pretty much shared with other departments, and we see that it's normal, common area that they would share with other departments. But you have a department here that administratively chief has a lot of functions. When you have also your senior administration that are doing the clerical work, they're doing work that could be done by clerical that would be more efficient and effective to be done. This is a full department that has, you have 2 stations, you have multiple vehicles, there's tremendous amount of money and equipment. There should be some support of fire inspections. When we evaluate all that, we find that of all the different areas that we find inefficiencies is the fact that because you have staff that are doing clerical work. So the time they're spending on clerical, they're not doing inspection. The time they're doing on putting reports together, they are not doing public education. The time that they're doing the reports, they're not preparing the training that is required to meet other requirements. On all aspects of looking at the program, generally speaking, we find that one common elements are missing is the administrative aspect. All the reports should be entered and all the documentation. We talk about having a record management system. When we say it's not in place, it's because it's lack of clerical elements. And this is something that we find that is pretty much systemic in the fire service. I've done many of these the last 3 years. I've been going everywhere. Before that, I spent my 32 years working mostly for all the fire services in Ontario and evaluating and working everywhere. Biggest issue with volunteer fire service is thinking that you're just volunteer, don't need clerical staff. But there's paperwork that has to be done. It still has to be run. And it has to be run efficiency. A lot of the efficiencies or even financial difficulties that we find that are not there, that could be a lot more sustainable, is the fact that clerical is not there to be able to maintain that. Paid hours allocated to the 3 ADCs position should be increased to 20 hours per week. Your ADCs are 20 hours per month. And again, it's a question that they don't have the times your programs, your core services, the numbers of volunteers that you have to do the full aspect of training, to have a full programs that will follow the NFP 1401, which is how to record and how to have a proper training documentations under the community. I tell you right now, Ministry of Labor comes under an incident, the first question will be, where's your paperwork? You have training, because you're supposed to train your staff. Where's the paperwork? When we find deficiencies, we find administrative deficiencies. And this is an area we find deficiencies. So on that aspect of it, to be able to assist is also make sure that all the paperwork is done, that it's done properly on all aspects, from the inspections to the preventions, and also to the maintenance and the equipments that you have to be able to know where it's all there. We just find that there's the deficiencies on the number of hours that's allocated to that staff. We're just saying that this is one of the elements that we find as a deficiency. And where we make a recommendation as to, okay, how can we improve? Especially if we're going to grow, if we're looking at growing, if you're looking at your strategic plan, then the call volume is pretty much directly related. There is a correlation between size of population and call volumes. So as you're growing, your call volumes will go up. There's no questions, absolutely not. The other recommendation, administratively speaking, was that town of Petawawa should add an appendix reflecting the set fine for Part 1 offenses be added to the fees and charge bylaws for a more efficient and effective cost recovery method. Administratively, again, I think we find, looking at it, that generally speaking, there's a lot of different areas, and you can look at different jurisdictions. We can provide assistance with, I can give lists. I may have given to the fire chief list of different ways of being able. Like I said, this is not revenue generation, it's cost recovery and proper cost recovery of inspections, probably cost recovery of attending fires, attending scenes that are probably recovered. We have a lot of municipalities that use a third party like Fire Marquee. Under the Insurance Act, every insurance that you're paying, the insurance is keeping a certain portion of it, especially to pay for these hazards. So we have a fire chief of Toronto started a business when he retired called Fire Marquee, where for all the municipalities and for the fire services, he recoups that money that is due for every single incident that insurance is collected. They're saying, hey, we want that money that's owed. So he gets that money back because the money is there. So we have more and more that we're seeing this. It is cost recovery. It's not generating revenues. It's that we're getting the money from where it's due to assist you in the fire service. Under the Fire Protection Part 8, you can recover costs. Under the Municipal Act, there's many different sections, 230 some, that tells you that you can recover your costs. There are costs that can be recovered, and there's ways of doing it. When we look administratively, we find a lot of holes where there's ways where you can recover costs. Like we said, on short terms, on fire inspections, on re-inspection, there's all kinds of different elements and different places to be able to recover costs, administratively speaking. Recommendations. Another part of the big sections that you have, your 4 different sections, and we look also is fire prevention and public education. Again, when we look at the fire service, the number of hours allotted to the part-time CFPO, and we need to look at determining a sustainable number of hours allotted to fire inspectors to complete fire inspection. Again, you have one staff, a chief that is a part-time, that has a certain number of, again, our famous 20 hours a month that is allocated to your chief fire prevention officers. You also have 3 other people that assist as fire inspectors and fire prevention officers that have different remunerations that they are getting for that. We're looking that this should be looked at. You should look at again, to be able to look at what you should, same as the CRA here, it's something that links to it, where you have a certain number that you're doing inspections. You need to look at your type of inspections, how you're doing it, and if you're doing adequately, if it's efficient or if it's not efficient. We found some deficiencies in the inspection aspect of it. Again, the inspection also pulls to the prevention programs or the public education program. In fact, we found very little in the public education program. And again, when consulting with the staff, looking at all your documentation, all aspects, it comes down to the time. Not allocated and not having enough time. So maybe we need to look at the inspectors, the chief inspector, looking at how we can accommodate a certain number of hours, distribute some number of hours. When we did this analysis, we used the NFPA 1730 and we did a staffing assessment. They provide us with checklists or lists to be able to calculate. We calculate your buildings, how long it takes to do an inspections. We determined that an inspection takes about 6.5 hours to complete an inspections. We're looking at your number, your staff, allocate at 20 hours. So we calculate how many hours during a year. We know that you have 237 inspection. For instance, you have a lot more, but you are doing in your inspection plan. When you use the formula that is provided by the NFPA 1730, it's telling us that you should have 6.5 staff doing that. So obviously, to be doing properly and to follow this, these are only inspections. We have the same formula and the same system that we've used under the standard in doing our calculation to evaluate your fire investigations. And fire investigation requires a minimum of 10 hours or to do an investigation. Again, you don't have as many in your municipalities, but we also look and see how many people you require to do fire investigation. So public education, we do the same thing. When we look at your programs and what it is, how many programs you have, how many hours is required. We break it all down in the reports that you'll be reading. It's all broken down, so we give you an idea of what staff requirements. Based on all that, we know that we make recommendation that you should look at your staffing. It's inefficient and you're not meeting the requirements of the work that you're doing. So basically, you're doing things we're kind of inefficient, put it this way. On that aspect of it, we talk about the fire investigation, which again, investigating fire is very important because we identified a lot of elements. Every single fire under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, it is the responsibility of the fire chief to investigate fires. So the act is very clear that fire investigation is the responsibility of two people in Ontario, the fire marshal and the fire chiefs, clearly. So fires has to be investigated. The fire marshal, obviously, will supersede your municipality by providing with the fire chief with a list of fires that they will investigate. And they provided the criteria that the fire chief will call the office of the fire marshal, and they will respond and assist on these, which are mostly the high risk and the fatalities to see what happened in the province and why people are dying in fires. The rest are to be, and if they're not identified and they're not part of the criteria for the fire marshal's office to investigate, then it is the responsibility of the fire chief to investigate the other ones. And that's a reality that's you need to be, people should be aware. It's right in the act that you should. So on that aspect, to assist then the fire marshal, obviously won't go everywhere in the province to investigate fires. I was a fire investigator where I was delegated by the fire marshal to investigate fires in the province of Ontario. The chief under section 6.6 has exactly the same powers of being able to delegate his fire investigation power. The reason is that the act allows for tremendous privacy issue. Like we allowed to go into people's home and investigate. So the entry, the powers of entry are tremendous, but it's for the safety of people that we do this. So that's why it's given to the chief, and this is why the chief can delegate. For that aspect of it, we recommend that the Fire Prevention Bureau or sections, all members should be trained. The fire chief, deputy chief, and the chief fire prevention officer are trained under the standards. You will need to be trained to what we call the NFPA 1033, which is the professional qualification for fire investigators that identify their skills and knowledge that they require to have to perform the job. We recommend that the whole team, the fire inspectors that are also part of the group, so we can spread the wealth, are also fully trained to the NFPA 1033. Again, we talked about this in the CRA, and it comes back into here where we say we should adopt a robust enforcement practice that would involve the use of part 1 and also part 3. So we find that when we're speaking with your staff, there's no utilization of because they are. The FPOs under the Act are POOs. So the FPOs are Provincial Offences Officer under the Act. So it's identified, right? Both acts says, hey, to be a POO, our police officers, and one of the groups that is identified in the Provincial Offences Act is fire prevention officers. So guess what? So they are, and there's very good tools to be able to have short wordings, and there's different places. There's tons of them, and a lot of municipalities have created short wordings. So just recommend that you use the short wordings, and when they go, it is a deterrent. It's not there to offend people, but the reality is that after a couple of times that we tell you to fix your smoke alarms, there's a $235 fine. And that's the reality of it. And the reality of it, it goes in the municipal coffer. You know how the system works for that. But that's the elements of it. And there's also the part 3. So we would like to be able to educate and work more with your staff as a recommendation that they should be more familiar to use part 1 and part 3. I know speaking with the staff and speaking with the chief that you have your BIOT officers that are assisting on that. But the reality is that the fire prevention should all know pretty much how to lay a part 1 and part 3 offense, and being able to know how to be able to prepare a brief and prepare the documentation for that purpose. And again, all this is under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. There's a section in the Act that says, yes, you can lay informations, and you can lay order, which is inspection orders. If people are not responding, if you say that you put an order and they have to respond to the order within 30 days or 90 days, and they do not, at least now you have a way under the Act to be able to serve them. Let's go to court, and explain why you haven't done what you did to render your place safe. Another part of your area or another division you have is the training. So I'm just going very widely on the different aspect. When we look into training, we looked at Again, same formula that I spoke about. There's a certain formula that we use, and our formula identified that you should have an equivalency of 0.21 FTE, which is a full-time equivalency, to the training program that you require right now to be able to have a fully functional training programs. You do have staff right now, you have an ADC of training, you have some training officer to be able to meet all your requirements under your your core services, and especially given that by 2026, you will have to adhere to the NFPA professional qualification standard for all the different aspects of training, from prevention, public education, fire investigation, firefighter, technical rescuer, pump operators. They all have to be certified to the standard. And so under the standard and their qualification, then we look at all that aspects, the type of the staff that you have, what is required to meet all that. We do believe that you're required to look at your staffing for your training division. Again, the same aspect is that there is a standard that's called 1402 that looks at a training facility. You have a great training facility, certainly commend the training facility that you have here. My last functions as Assistant Deputy Fire Marshal was to operate the fire college in the certification province in the province, and we went with regional training centers. There's great values. If you ask me about regional training centers, Renfrew County does not have one right now. So you have a great facility that I would suggest that you invest a little bit in it. Your training will be self-sufficient and self-paid by everyone else around here that would come to train at your facility. Right now, there's nobody in Renfrew County that offers the facility. So there's tremendous potentials to look at the NFPA standards. You already have a good start where you are in the elements, the size of the property. You already have hydrants on the property. You have all the elements in place to be able under standard 1403, which is live fire training, meet all the requirements. You have a property that would easily meet the requirements of the NFPA 1402 for props and facilities to be able to use properly and to be able to provide the service. The evaluation that we've done, you're there, you should absolutely look at these elements. We made a recommendation that you need to look at that aspect of it. Again, the other aspect is the central repository system. We find that generally speaking, prevention, training, there's a common theme here. There's a systemic issue of having an RMS, a record management system. And again, here there's the NFPA 1401 that pretty much tells you and gives you all the information. Above that, there's the part 7 of the guidance note, section 21 guidance note, part 7. Pretty much it tells fire services, because they know that the Ministry of Labor will want your records. That tells you about how you should record, what type of records you should have for training, and how should be kept. All this is part of the RMS, or the record management system. So if you adhere to part 7 of the guidance note, and if you adhere to the NFPA 1401, you would probably establish a very adequate and sufficient record management system. And that's another recommendation that we make for the fire service and long term, where you can improve the fire service. In the division of suppression of responding to calls and your response, again, one of the recommendations of suppression is to assess the option of increasing its firefighting force above the current 37 firefighter to leverage its daytime firefighter capacity to meet the requirements that is set in 1720. So again, generally, yes, the 80 percentile, we're doing very well. Where we having issue is that if we specifically, you meet it at the 80 percentile, guess what, the 20 percentile, where we don't meet it, it's probably your daytime response, where we know that it's harder to have the proper staffing to meet that. So we are saying that you should absolutely consider and looking at how we can, there's different elements of doing it. When we took, for instance, the reason that we talk about staffing and looking at maybe preventions, staffing, and looking at also your training staffing, and we look at your administration staffing, what we do most of the time is we're telling you at the end of the day that if you have if some of these staff are full-time or part-time staff, you will have enough of these people, if they work 20 hours a week, to be responding to your daytime calls. So you will meet your requirements of having adequate, and at the same time, you will meet the requirements of all your other sections, the inefficiency of all the other sections of prevention, training, and administrations. So it is one recommendation while often we speak and we say that, one way of looking at it, the 5 groups that we should have in our service is a chief, a deputy chief, a training officer, a prevention officer, that we should have. So when we look at that, and sometimes the administration, if they also are full firefighter trained, guess what? There are your staff that will also be there, plus your volunteer cadres. But at least when you call, if there's only 1 or 2 that can respond because of their employment, plus the staff that you have full-time, you will meet your requirements of your 6 staff very easily. So all this is all recommendation that we've made that looks at all aspects of it to make sure it's sustainable and it's affordable. Apparatus, facilities, and equipment. When we look at this and we did the full evaluations, we reviewed. We don't do a review, an engineer review of the facility as to, okay, how much money is it? You can have a structure, you can ask the engineers to do this. The purpose is not for us. We look at the operational of the fire stations. Is this set properly to make an adequate response to any type of fire protection services that you're offering in your municipality? That's what we're looking at. Is there enough room for your prevention staff? Is there enough room for your training staff? You have adequate training? You have adequate equipment or locations to respond in the timely manners to suppression incidents? That's what we do. We look at the fire stations, the equipment that you have based on your core services. On the facility of it, we did look at the aspects of right now there is a merger. When the village and the township merge, obviously we see this everywhere. Everywhere there's been merger. If they merge 17 municipalities, it still has 17 fire stations. And that's the reality of everywhere I go in the province. I'm working with a county right now that has us to do an evaluation. And again, there's 8 municipalities and they have 21 stations. Because obviously when we merged everybody, we didn't get rid of our stations. When we did the evaluation here, you do have 2 stations here, but the reality is that of our evaluation is that your department function as one department, as one area. You may have multi-station, but one area, and really you have 2 locations, but they are dispatched. Everything is concealed as to one area. And there should be consideration as maybe having 1 station instead of having 2 stations and having to go with the expenses, and it goes with all these properties and everything else, and maintaining the 2 property that you have. If you are doing this, obviously in the document, the way we're talking is that we talk about the training aspect of it, and you do have an area and a training center and some property there. So obviously you could improve in your training aspects, you could improve in your facilities, and you can easily gain from this. I don't want to say kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but the reality is that that's the aspect of it, is that your training elements, you can improve your training, and you can also improve your fire suppression response and locations and programs. At the same time, for providing the training, the accommodation that is required for training purposes, for training staff, and also for your prevention staff to make sure that they have offices, space, and everything else. Our evaluation, we find that one aspect is administrative locations. Both location is lacking of administrative offices, of sit down. For the chief, for the deputy chief, for your assistant deputy chiefs, for the prevention, there's no room. So that's what we mean by aspects of that. So that's what we looked at the aspects. The equipments, if we're looking at it again, and knowing that your population will be growing, and if you're looking at an aspects of getting an aerial, both stations right now in aerials is a minimum of 50 feet, minimum of a 50 feet space. So when we look at station and evaluation, we look at a distance. There should be at least 6 feet on both sides of the vehicles that is there. When we look at the best design, we look at least 5 feet at the front to the bay door and 10 feet at the rear. You don't have that right now for your vehicles, and you certainly cannot fit any aerial in any of your fire halls right now. So you'll have to park it outside because you will not fit it inside. So that's the reality of it. So when we use this, we use a checklist that is best designed for fire halls, and we look at what should be the requirements and what would be best for distance and for spacings between apparatus with equipment. Your apparatus floors, the equipment, you do have some aspect of here. They're not completely separated. They should be separated for health and safety reason. I commend the elements of the equipment that you have acquired to be able to evaluate the fumes and the diesel fumes and the carcinogens that would be that are in the vehicles. But the reality is that there should be a separate. It should be a dirty zone and there should be a clean zone, and you don't have specific zones. At one station you do, at the other station 2 here, you do not have any specific zone. So that's why we look at all aspects of it and to be able to identify what requirements and maybe giving you an option as to facility-wise. So that was our requirements on the facility. Again, when we look at the apparatus, again, we looked at the NFPA and the FUS standard that talks about a replacement schedule and how many vehicles. For instance, every 5 vehicles, there should be 1 spare vehicles. So that means that if you have 5 pumpers, you should really have 6 because you should have 1 spare. If you have a tanker, like if you do at least a minimum of 5, if you have a minimum of 5, there should be a minimum of 1 replacement vehicle for them. Schedule of replacement schedule, both the NFPA and also the FUS with the fire underwriter have recommendation as to how long the expectancy of a vehicle. Basically, life expectancy of the vehicle. The first 2 vehicles, the first one that is being used is 15 years. Then it can be moved to the second due vehicle, which allows you to keep it for 20 years. And then it could go to almost up to 25 years as a spare, as we call a reserve vehicle or spare. And the reserve vehicle should be fully equipped. Right now, we don't see this in your evaluation of all your aspects at adding a specific vehicle replacement schedules. We would suggest, and one of our recommendations is to adhere to the NFPA or to the fire underwriter survey as to having a replacement schedule for your vehicles. Also, EMG notes that due to the anticipation growth of the project, and we said the aerial, and we already spoke about another aspect on equipment and apparatus is the acquisition of an aerial. You do have right now a memorandum of understanding or an agreement with Garrison. We just feel that when we look at risk and we evaluate the aspect of risk, if that vehicle is being used or if that vehicle is being repaired and you're not aware of it as being repaired, then it's not there. So especially if you're going to grow, and we looked at some of the aspect of your growth right now, the new hotels, the aspects that are going, if you are going to intensification purposes and to medium to high density accommodations in your strategic growth plan, you should consider an aerial. And like I said, every floor requires at least 13-foot ladder. So just add a 4, it's a lot more than what the ladder can handle right now. These are, generally speaking, again, there's a lot more of all the different recommendations. They're all evidence-based. They're all based on materials. And I'm very sorry taking so much of your time. But again, we'd like to acknowledge the dedication of the professional personnel that we met, the aspects, the response, the efficiency of your fire service. And also would like to thank everyone that assisted us in the development of the master plan for you. So all the information we have gathered and everyone that provided us with all the information. Again, this presentation is a high-level overview of the strategic and operational recommendations. And again, there are recommendations for you with the fire chief to identify which one, how you would apply this for your 10-year plans for your fire service. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to present this to you, Mayor, and to councilors. Any questions?
Okay, don't worry about the time. It was all good information. Just let me say that it's quite obvious you have a high level of expertise and knowledge and passion for what you do and bringing forth all these recommendations and ensuring not only our community, but in the other communities you do this as well, that all of the fire services meet the minimum standards and ensure that the communities are safe. You've obviously done a lot of research. data analysis. You talked about GIS and AI. And I like the fact that you also offered us some strategies in terms of budgetary constraints we might have, in terms of leasing vehicles, and there were some very unique ideas when it came to building new fire stations as well, with affordable housing on top and all those sorts of things. So I commend you for all the work that you and your team has put into this, it shows with your presentation. I feel a lot more knowledgeable about fire and fire services and all of the things that communities need. I have more to say, but I'll open it up to members of council for comments or questions. Councilor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'll just like to say thank you for the documents. Clearly, a lot of time has went into it. It's very in-depth. And I will say that I do think, I also travel all over Eastern Ontario, all different fire halls. I do think we have the best equipped, best trained, most professional volunteer fire service. There is things I like about it. There is things I don't agree with in the report, but like we said, these are all recommendations that will be brought forward to council and we will make our final decision. I do really like that you pointed out about we should be setting a bylaw for standard of service because that is important. And so it's not, we're not just running through everything. We should have direct, concrete stuff of what we're going to do. The one thing I'm going to ask you about, when you talked about inspections, and we are currently doing it at 2 hours per inspection, 237 inspections, and you're saying 6.5 hours. So we're going over 3 times more. That's over 1,000 hours more per year. You have an hour for travel. So if I'm going out for an inspection, I'm not going to travel, go to one, come back, and then go to another inspection. You're going to go out and do multiple in a row, but now you're adding that hour on for your statistics for the whole thing. So it does skew the total hours I think required, which when you're justifying jobs based on the hours that you're saying are required, I think that is skewed. But other than that, it's a well laid out document and yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah. Just to mention on this, just on that element is when we look, the model that we use also looks at the hour. The time is not broken down as to your follow-up and everything else. So when we say an hour, it includes all the elements. If there's follow-ups, elements, aspect of it. So we look at, generally speaking, on one inspection, your follow-up, your re-inspections. That's where we do the time. So the time that is based, and I apologize if that was not clear, but it's based on all elements of your initial inspections, of your re-inspection. There is, so we look all that aspect, and that comes from the standards. So it's not come from me, it comes from the standard. But I just want to specify that when we looked at it and when we use that formula, we don't break it down. So we make an assumptions, or the standard makes an assumption that you'll do your inspections, that you will be returning for your re-inspections, that you will be doing a further inspection if there's required and follow-ups. So that's why they say that that's the time that they're allocating for it. So I apologize, but that's a very good question and a very good point that to clarify.
Deputy Mayor Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Guy, and your team and everybody who participated. There's a lot of recommendations here, and as has been said, we'll have to take a look at those that are the highest priorities and the costs associated with them and implementation. I really do like the administrative support piece, however. I think that we've got a tremendous talent in our teams and expertise, and when we utilize that expertise on non-priority areas, it really doesn't give us the best bang for our buck, and that's why we've got all these professionals. So thank you for that. The other thing I liked was the cost recovery element. It it certainly will allow us to be more efficient with our resources when we're bringing in the revenues to offset those things. And in the report here, one of the things that I picked up was just the burn permits, for example, that we're way under in terms of what we charge for our burn permits, and that's a reality. So, I think we've got some movement in some of those areas. So again, thank you, and I look forward to the discussion we'll have at the council level about the prioritization and the forward movement based with the team. Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Councilor Perdue?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you again for this document. Same as what Gary said, I learned a lot. I didn't know what a flashover event was, for example. So again, thank you for what you do for this town and for residents. And I just had one specific question, and if I need to send an email after the fact, but when you were highlighting the lack of a tiered medical response, that was something new for me. And I guess I just had one question based on one concern. So looking at sort of the too many duties, concern about burnout, I'm wondering, are there really efficiencies or economies to be gained by putting that role on our fire service as well? I hadn't ever considered that before, so I'm wondering if there's some more information on that. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. Yes. Yes, in fact, often in the aspect, a lot of the elements of their systemic issue with tiered response is to make sure that there is a good document protocol that is set with the EMS. And we find that in a lot of jurisdictions when we issues. There should be, but on top of it is that there should be a good protocol that really identified what we are responding to. And often we don't, and then there's what we have the creep elements of it. So we have creeping issues that will create absolutely. So where we have municipalities, most of the time with the work that we're doing right now, in fact, is an evaluation of where there's a medical response, a tiered response. They want us to review and evaluate because of the creeping aspect of it. Where suddenly we're responding to way more than what the protocol, and we're not adhering to the protocol, what we should be responding to. So there is an element of safety. There's a way where we can really much enhance public safety. But there has to be a very good protocol that put in place for that, where there is not a burden on the staff. And that's the element. The burden comes where there's a creep. And we're seeing this in municipalities. I'm working with municipalities right now that the report is completely based. It's not a fire master plan. They want a review of their tier response program for the issues that they're having of the staffing, tremendous staffing issue. Because of the creeping, you're looking at areas where 70 to 80% of their calls are medical. So the apparatus, the equipment, there's tremendous aspect of it that expenses on the municipality. You don't want to be faced with that. So there's municipalities that says, well, let's not go there. That way we minimize our costs because there are costs associated with medical calls. However, the reality is it's the creep that if it's really identified what you're responding to and where is the best aspect for the municipality, you will gain from that.
Thank you.
There questions or comments? Okay, I just had a couple of quick questions. I know this isn't the only municipality you've gone and done the fire master plan for, and I know there are a lot of recommendations in terms of HR with our fire suppression teams and admin and inspections and all of that. So just to compare us to other municipalities, is it common when you go to other municipalities and say, you know, you're lacking in HR, or do you go to some municipalities and say, you guys are just right, or you guys have too much? Or is it more common to go to a municipality and find that you need more here, you need more HR here, you need more bodies here?
And again, two parts of it. Part of the fact that 32 years of working with the fire service in Ontario, I can tell you it's a systemic issue. It's a systemic issue that's mostly associated with the volunteer group, administratively speaking. So, and also with large municipal services. We're talking about large municipal services. I'm doing review where we always find clerical is an issue. There's always a lack of clerical or proper documentations. They don't have documentation. They don't have their affairs in order because the clerical is not there. And we're talking about major municipalities, full-time career departments with over 400 staff, that one admin assistant. And that's the reality of it. So there is a systemic issue, and I can tell you that probably I've done at least 25 for emergency management reviews, a fire service review or fire master plan. And the fire services is a scalar organization. It works where the authority comes from the top down. It is a paramilitary system. So they're great at that system with no clerical aspect. The civil side of it is not very well understood or taken care of in the fire service. And we find that it perpetuates in all communities. So systemically speaking, well, yes, it's an issue that we see. Generally speaking, I can tell you that probably 90% of the time, there's a recommendation to look at their administrative staff in one or more than one divisions, depending on the size of their divisions.
Okay, I was just wondering if we were unique, and I didn't think so. And I'm gonna ask one more question. I don't need an answer now, but it was very interesting to hear how good our training facilities are. And I've been out to them a few times, and it's interesting to hear that there's nothing else like it in Renfrew County. And I know you talked about the other regional training centers. So I guess when you bring your report forward, Craig, about recommendations and priorities, it'd be interesting to hear what we need to do to our facility to bring it up to, I guess, a regional training standard. Because it sounds like it could be a bit of an income generator in terms of bringing in fire departments from all over Renfrew County, or maybe even beyond, to come and train at our center, as well as having a state-of-the-art training center for our very own fire department. Okay, and any other questions?
If I may just
Oh, yeah,
add, because the province of Ontario, I retired when we closed the fire college, the physical aspect of it. It's time for me to retire. But the reality of it is that we moved to a model of regionalization to be able to access more people. So the province is also supporting the regionalization process of supporting with instructors, also paying for instructors, paying for facilities, assisting the municipalities to be able to do cost recovery. Because the idea is for training to be cost neutral for you. So you would have revenues, and we make sure with the province that it becomes cost neutral, but at the same time, it pays for your full training. The whole province trains your staff, will be fully trained, very, very professionally trained, and then they can teach your own staff and also teach the community around. So the value is tremendous, and the potential is there since the government in 2022 went to the new models of regionalization. So that's why we put a recommendation with the facility that you have. You should take advantage of that regionalization.
Okay, well, thank you again, Guy, for coming and bringing us this report. It was fantastic, and we have a lot to think about, and we'll be looking forward to the recommendations that our senior leadership team from the fire department brings forward to us in the future, and to taking the necessary steps we need to ensure that our fire department provides the minimum, not just the minimum, but the best service we can to keep our community safe. So thanks for helping us with that. Okay, thanks Craig and Jamie.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for being patient, Angela. She's gonna kill me. Yeah. You can wow everybody at home if you're a fire department. No?
Yeah.
Okay, next we're going to go to the 2023 audited financial statements. And it's great to see Angela here from Welch LLP. And just let you know, Angela was actually here all day working on the 2024 audit. Okay, the floor is yours, Angela.
Thank you. I'll try to be quicker. Okay, so first off, I know you all have it in front of you, but we'll start just the regular independent auditor's report. The first page, it is the general standard auditor's report. I'm happy to say it's a clean audit opinion. There's nothing there that I'm worried about that stands out as being areas of concern. I do want to remind you, when you look at this, remember it's consolidated. Consolidated meaning the library's books are in this as well. 30.27% of the Pembroke Airport is also in this, so about similar to the prior year, and 40.63% of the Waste Recovery Center is also in this. So just remember that as you're looking at this. It's not strictly based on your budget that was put together for 2023. It's everybody's budget, everybody's actuals, okay? So we will look at the first statement of financial position. Okay, but there on the screen as well. page 362 in your budget pack, or your package if you'd like. So we'll start at the top. Cash, again, this is at December 31st of 2023, a snapshot of what the municipality and its consolidated entities had and what it owed. Okay, so cash balance, very healthy, $20.7 million. You'll see that was higher than 2022, thanks in part, or a good part, to Ontario government finally giving you some of that money they were promising from the federal government for those school taxes on the pills. So that was a catch-up payment for those 3 years of $2.86 million. And as you know, you set that aside in a special reserve. So, but that's included in that cash balance there. The investments, now these are investments held at the Waste Recovery Center as well as at the airport. So these are just your portion of those investments, okay? Taxes receivable, meaning taxes owing to the municipality. Now this would just be the municipality of $1.2 million at the end of 2023. So yes, you'll see that it's higher than the prior year, but as we know, with the inflationary rises happening, people are picking and choosing what they want to pay for and what's more important to them. So that could be a portion of why it's increasing. But I do want to let you know that by the end of 2024, just recently, these amounts were down to $541,000. Okay, so yes, it's a big number. It's been reduced for anything owing for 2023 and prior by the end of 2024. Okay. Accounts receivable, so what is owed to you other than taxes. You'll see that number is also higher again this year. Largely, D&D still owes for water and sewer buildings they haven't paid for. You have a little more HST that you're going to be collecting this year. And your grants receivable have also increased with the Net Zero project. So more money coming to you, which you've received a lot of that in 2024, other than the D&D. Also, the library and the Waste Recovery Center and the airport all have increased receivables as well. That's why the number is higher in 23. Okay. Inventories, small number on this statement. Most of that increase has to do with the fuel at the airport. So again, not yours. So you had total financial assets of $29 million. Okay. Then we move down to libraries and what was owed at December, or liabilities. So accounts payable and accrued liabilities, those general bills that you owe for operating the municipality. So you'll see that's also higher this year. There's some additional accrued holdbacks. So holdbacks being a big construction projects, right? They keep back that you don't have to pay the first 10% statutory holdback. And then there's another like 2.5% that you hold back and don't pay them until you know that the service has been done or the job's been done appropriately, right? So those things we have to set up as part of the expense because it was a cost that was incurred during the year. It just hasn't been paid out yet, okay? So that's how that works. Also, there's vacation in the bank time owing was up this past year as well. Deferred revenue general. So this is money that you've received with restrictions placed on it or money for future events. So the unspent portion of grants, mostly this is the community transportation grant that's not yet spent. And there was a reduction in Civic Center prepayments. So sometimes people pay in advance for the Civic Center items. So that reduced this year as well. Deferred revenue obligatory. So this is your development charges and government funding like CCBF and OSIF that have not yet been spent but received. So mostly you have the CCBF of $534,000 that was not spent during 2023, but you got the money and was spent in 2024. So it's sitting there waiting to be spent. Okay. A big change you'll note, the asset retirement obligations. This was an accounting policy change under Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, a requirement. this year, what you used to see there was provision for landfill closure or post-closure care. If anyone remembers that from last year. Again, this is a number generated based on the engineer's expected costs on what it will take to close off the waste recovery landfill site. Because there's always monitoring and ongoing costs once it completely fills and is covered. Okay, so it's just, this is your portion of the estimate. But you got to remember the Waste Recovery Center has set aside those investments that we saw up above to help pay for that in the future when that happens. So although it looks like a big number, it looks like it's a liability on your books, the Waste Recovery Center is managing that by offsetting it with investments and money set aside. Okay. Long-term debt, again, not a municipality number. It's all with the Waste Recovery Center and the airport. And if you want more information on what that debt consists of, that's in note 7. But there was no new debt issues in 2023. Okay. So net financial assets of almost $19 million. So non-financial assets being those items that aren't cash necessarily or turned into cash easily. Tangible capital assets. So these are your long-term assets that have value over a number of years. Your land improvements, buildings, your infrastructure assets, roads, sewer, water system. So that's almost $112 million. So that increased over 2022 because you had about 7.4 million in major work done at the sewage plant and 5 million in additional infrastructure assets. So that's when I say infrastructure, roads, sewer, water, storm, sewer. Okay. Plus there was an additional 1.6 invested in other town assets, being land improvements mostly in 2023's case. Okay. And there's more detail on that large number if you want in Schedule 1, and it's broken down by different categories. And then prepaid expenses are items paid for in advance for future periods. So a lot of it is prepaid insurance because the insurance goes June to June. So you pay for half of the year in advance. And the increase is about 15% insurance premiums for the town last year. Another increase there. Okay. So you ended up with an accumulated surplus of 131 million, which I will break down a little bit later. But before I move on to the next page, does anyone have any questions on this one?
Any questions on the statement of financial position? No? Keep on trucking.
Okay. Next page, please. Okay, so consolidated statement of operations. So again, this is what happened over the whole year of 2023. Okay, what was generated for revenue and the expenses that went out. So that payment in lieu of taxes, so the second line there, you can see that big jump to $11 million. That's where that mitigation payment from the Ontario government is booked this year. So in the past 3 years, you would have seen that the actuals were less than budget because you were expecting more money for those school board taxes for the PILs. And this year you finally got it in 23. Okay. User and frontage charges. So wastewater and water fees are hard to estimate. Each year you're kind of basing it on the study projections, but we don't know if it's ever going to be the case. So you were actually higher, which is great for revenue than the budget. And you're pretty consistent over 2022. Provincial and government transfers. So this is funding, typically, grants that you're given. And there was more than expected because you didn't budget for the net zero project in 2023. So looking, your budget was 1.8 million, but your actuals were 2.8 million. Now you'll see it's less slightly than the 2022 numbers, but in 2022 there was more net zero funding, And you had a $250,000 federal economic development grant in 22 that you didn't receive in 23. Okay, we already spoke about the CBF funding and why that number is down because money's not yet spent. Development contributions and development charges. It was budgeted to pull more money from development charges in 23 to cover off some of the projects, but many were incomplete, like the fire master plan, as you just see, is now complete. So in 23 it was only started. Rocky Estates was just started, and then there was items that were not done at all. The recreation master plan, you had a plow grader truck that you were hoping to purchase, and the water main looping in Sammy Drive were all budgeted to remove money for use of, but didn't get used or spent. Okay. Another very positive number is your investment income. With interest rates and the high extra amounts of cash in your bank accounts and reserve funds, $1 million, again, consolidated, but the town's portion alone doubled in 23 over what you got in 2022. So very positive. Penalties and interest, very similar year over year. We'll look at the last line of the revenue, the loss, gain on disposal of tangible capital assets. So that's the disposal of assets throughout the year, which you never budget for. You never know what you're going to sell off during the year or replace. In this case, there was some road replacement that still had some book value to it, but we've replaced it. So we just have to write off that little bit of book value. Okay. So overall, your revenue was almost $35 million, up from about 29 million in 2022. Now, when we look at expenses, they're often the more popular piece that people are interested in. So remember that when you look at the budget, council does not budget for amortization. Amortization, as you may recall, is the write-down, the yearly annual write-down of these assets. Because in the year you buy them, you don't just say, oh, this is a big expense for statement purposes. I know you do for your budget purposes, but for financial statement purposes, they're set up as tangible. You write off a portion of it over time based on your capital asset policy, which you all should have seen back when it was, or you could look up, I guess, if some of you weren't here at the time when it was put into place. But you do have a policy on that, how long the assets are written off. So those, and the treasurer brings forth a report each year when you do the budget, reminding you that there's certain items that aren't budgeted for, and amortization is one of them. So every time you look at this budget number, remember there's missing that big piece. And I'll kind of let you know as we go through how much the amortization was, so you can see you're really not off as much as it looks. Okay? So I'll go compare the budget to what the actuals, and then the actuals from 23 to 22. Okay. Another item, high-level item to note with the expenditures is the wages were up across the board over what the budget was. The time the budget was done, it was expected a 3% increase. When the salary grid was approved, CPI was actually 6.9. So there's a large difference there. Okay. So when we look at the general government, in this case, you were under budget, which is so 2 million versus 1.87. Much of that had to do with legal and consultant fees that were budgeted for that thankfully you didn't have to use. Property maintenance costs were also significantly less than budgeted. But then again, salaries were higher and amortization was not budgeted for. So over 2022, you'll see it's increased slightly, and that was mostly due to wage increases. Okay. Protection to persons and property, pretty close to what the budget was. Again, wage costs were up, and actually, as you saw in their presentation, your incidents went from 117 in 2022 to 149 incidents. So it's reflective of the salaries going up because you can't budget. Again, you don't know how many fire calls firemen are gonna have to go to, so it's an estimate. And the fact that it went up matches exactly what they told you earlier, so that was nice to see. The fire costs were also higher for the purchase of new uniforms, and increase in property maintenance costs, including replacement garage doors, the framing of the laundry room, and a replacement fire tower. So it's reasons why it was higher than in 2022. Transportation. So the budget's 2.8 million less than the actual. So this is where it looks really like a big difference, but this is where a lot of your amortization really shows up, because all your roads and sewer infrastructure assets show up in this transportation for the most part. So again, there's 2.1 million right there in amortization that's not budgeted for. So that takes a big chunk of the difference out. And then again, salary costs were higher than expected and material costs were higher. So then over the 2022 year, slightly up. Again, a lot of this is actually the airport this year. They had a lot of expenses. So in that number, there's a large portion of airport costs. Your winter control costs were also higher in 23, and then amortization was higher as well. Environmental services, again, 1.5 more than the budget, but that's amortization again that you don't budget for. And there's only a slight increase, I'd say, in year over year from 22 to 23. Again, the Waste Recovery Center is a lot of that because they had higher expenditures. Recreational and cultural services. Again, it's more due to wages and amortization. Materials were also higher than expected. There was some work done at the library that wasn't budgeted for, and that's also why it's higher in 23 over 22, because this work wasn't, like there was work that was never done in prior year, like duct cleaning, there was some replacement flooring, some LED lighting, some shelving and baseboard installation, and some carpet cleaning done at the library that's included in that line. Wages were also up there. They had about 12 more contract or part-time staff in 23 compared to 2022, and there was some extra overtime paid out in 2023. Okay. Planning and development. So this is actually where you were less than budget, because the SIP payments, the grants, were less than expected. We didn't hand out quite as much money in 23 as you planned, and there were budgeted for an additional planner in 2023, which you didn't have. So that's why it's less. So overall, 25 million in expenses, so 2 million more than 2022, leaving an excess of revenue over expenses of $9.5 million consolidated. Okay. So if you want a different detailed breakdown of the expenditures by like wages and materials and that kind of stuff, it is in the notes, page 376 in your package, your agenda package. That compares it against budget as well if you want more information on that. Before I go to the really important page that you're most interested in, does anyone have questions on that?
Questions on the statement of operation? You must be doing a good job. Nobody's
just want to get through it. Get me out of here. Okay, note 10. So this is page 376. So I told you I'd explain that $131 million accumulated surplus over time. So this breaks it down more by your budget and yeah. So you'll see the general budget. The general budget, you had a surplus of $142,000. So you had more revenue than expenses. This is the general. Then you also have your water and wastewater budget, you do separate budgets for those, as you know. So the water budget was $172,000 surplus in 2023. Now the wastewater ended up in a $901,000 deficit. And the reason for that is we had some audit adjustments. You may recall that you came and approved a bunch of transfers to and from reserve based on the numbers at the time. And unfortunately, I had some audit adjustments to make for some extra holdbacks to the net zero project, for the sewage plant and the sewage system. There was some missing invoices in there. So after I made all those adjustments, you ended up having the deficit. Now, had the treasurer known about that at the time when she did the report, she would have just asked to not reduce the transfer from reserves by as much, right? So it would have been covered off. So it's not concerning, not something that just jumped out. It happens, and in order to cover that off, she does have a report I know she's bringing to you shortly after to cover that deficit and pull it from reserves as it would have been done at the time if she had those numbers with her at too. Okay. So you'll see then as well, if we continue on that note, your internally restricted reserves, so this is the money you've set aside internally for your water, your wastewater, and all the different reserve funds, is sitting at $22 million at the end of 23. Again, this asset retirement liability, not to worry about, that's waste recovery centers, 2.8 unfunded liability. And then your equity and tangible capital assets is just the value of your assets. Okay, so that's where it comes to your $131 million.
Questions on note 10? We're rolling.
Okay, so that's all I had on the financial statements. Now, as you know, with an audit, we always do provide a recommendation letter, a management letter at the end to present our findings. So I know you've all seen it. It's all part of your budget package, so I won't go in great detail. But we did find some deficiency in internal controls when we were out in August and brought them forth so that management had time to work through and correct them. And I'm thankful to say, like the mayor said, I was out here today, so I was able to see a lot of these have been corrected since. So I'm happy to report that. And as well, my last internal control recommendation was to bring the checks issued to council, and you'll see that was also in your report. So I don't need to discuss any of this further. Management is well aware of it. I also had a discussion with the mayor. If there's specific questions.
Questions on the letter with recommendation? Okay.
Otherwise, I'd just like to thank the staff for having me and accommodating me and think about it.
Well, thank you very much, Angela, for all of your work you and your team have done. And as I said, we saw you and your whole team in here again today working on the 2024 audit. So that's great to see. It looks like our timetable will be moved forward this year. And thanks for all of your excellent explanations and all of your recommendations. Anything further? Okay. I guess we're going to adopt a resolution to accept this audited financial statement a little later on in the next meeting. Hopefully not too much later. Okay, thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move right along here to FIN-01-2025, which is the 2023 financial statements and disposition report. Christine.
I'm not going to regurgitate everything that Angela walked you through. She did kind of end off at a great segue point in terms of the focusing on what our surplus or deficit is just from a town perspective. And in order to, and I can read financial statements, but in order to assist with, again, from a transparency and helping to translate from financial statements to more of an operational review, the attachment to this report follows a similar format of quarterly reporting that I previously presented to council. So again, it does exclude the amortization and depreciation. It excludes the library, the airport, and the waste recovery center, so that you can see what you as council approved from a town perspective. So it's just an added layer or level of detail that this information hasn't been provided from when the financial statements are presented. From what I can tell in previous years, it was just a detailed listing from our financial system line by line, but not giving you a summative view and a departmental view as well. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have been saving for me versus Angela to help her get out of here sooner. But again, the resolutions in the report are tying back to the surplus from the operating fund and the water fund, and then the deficit from a wastewater fund. I would like to kind of provide a little bit more depth in terms of the operating fund surplus. So on the last page of the appendix, so I'm gonna, so I believe that's page 396 of, sorry, excuse me, that's the wastewater. I want to scroll up. The page 394. So the total operating fund summary. So if we were just to look at 2023 alone, we actually had a surplus of $1 million. However, from 2022, as Angela mentioned, there was a shortfall on the budget with respect to the vet health. So we're kind of offsetting the loss in a previous year from this year's gain. So that's the basic math of how we're getting to the 142,000. So there's no magic, it's just math, but I did want to provide that level of detail to council. Because again, moving into 2024, we won't have that carryover, because this report here says that we're going to be transferring that surplus into reserve, so that for 2024, that we're looking at 2024, we're not being impacted by previous years. And then that's the goal and the plan for 2025, so that we can budget and track things accordingly and not having these carryovers in the sign of a balanced budget. Any questions?
Any questions on FIN-01-2025? Deputy Mayor Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Christine. Christine, the 142,745 going to special projects. Do we have a policy bylaw that speaks to what those special projects are and how we allocate those funds, or is that under development?
That is under development. So there is a difference between reserves versus reserve fund. So a reserve fund does require a bylaw. A reserve just needs to be established through council resolution, which was established as part of the 2024 budget. But it is in the works, yes, that is in the project plan for 2025 to come up with a, housekeeping of what we currently have, as well as a plan and strategy for what we are doing with all of our reserve and reserve funds going forward. So it is a work in progress to provide clear direction and definition as to each of those savings, if you will.
Thank you. So the special projects really doesn't have a definition and a methodology for how we're going to make decisions to spend that money. So I guess that's not a comfort level I have right now.
I do want to clarify and elaborate on that special projects reserve. Council did approve to allocate the majority of those funds to the Murphy Road project for 2024. So that is part of what council has already earmarked for that. But I understand your concern, and it is a project priority for the finance team for 2025.
Second.
Yeah, so again, I understand that it's a priority. Usually when we allocate funds, we put it into a reserve for a very specific, this could be for anything. And we don't know what that could be. So I'm wondering, recognizing that that's a priority, if we put it in project, if we put it in special projects now, we decide that we want to take it out of special projects and put it into something else that's a high need, do we have that capacity to do that? I guess is, if I don't have comfort with that, at least we have alternatives if we need them. And I guess that's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Yes, there is definitely that flexibility through council direction. Definitely, yes.
Thank you.
Further questions on the report? Councillor Christian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Less question, more comment. Thank you for all the work that obviously went into all of this, and thank you very much for how digestible it all was. So I think I read this after I read all the fire stuff, and just because it was something completely different, but also it had the same tone almost as the fire master plan. Just a really careful, thorough, transparent presentation of what happened in the audit and all that. So huge appreciation to all the staff and all the time that went into this. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Do you see the recommendation there? You need me to read it first before I ask for a motion? I shall read the recommendation. So the recommendation is that council approve the town of Petawawa's 2023 financial statements and that the surplus and deficit of each fund be approved as follows. The water fund surplus of $172,757.94 be transferred to the water life cycle reserve. The wastewater fund deficit of $901,669.95 be funded by a transfer from the wastewater life cycle reserve, and the operating fund surplus of $142,744.72 be transferred to the special projects reserve. If you're comfortable, I need a motion. Moved by Councillor Coutu, seconded by Councillor Carmody. I don't have to read it all again, do I? No. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, next we have FIN-02-2025, response to Welch LLP management letter. Christine, you're up again.
Thank you. So as Angela referenced, they have provided us recommendations, and I'm happy to report that we have addressed them. And I do want to thank council because we wouldn't have been able to, I guess, improve things, improve processes, and build our capacity within our team without council's approval to add one additional team member. So if you can see kind of where we were lacking, and as well just from management of staff time and minimizing of overtime, it's been a great addition to the team. So not only that one team member, but the entire team, the finance department, thanks you. So I'm happy to report that we are on top of things, and I'm not going to put, I'm looking forward to Angela's recommendations for the 2024 audit. So again, we've accelerated our timelines, and a lot of, for example, the holdbacks, being able to track those before. Previously, it was the auditors were relied upon to I guess, finalize that at audit time. We are now tracking those internally and reviewing with our department heads. So not only kind of just doing the bare minimum, but going above and beyond and tracking things properly. So I'm happy to answer any questions on the report itself, but every time I sit at this table, I talk about transparency. So I wanted to give this to council in terms of what exactly we've done, as well as the public.
Questions on the report? Deputy Mayor Sauer.
I guess just a comment to say that, you know, everyone can improve something, and it's important when we recognize and make the effort towards that. So thanks to the entire team for that. Much appreciated.
Councillor Kern.
Thank you, Mayor Service. Yes, as you pointed out in the first sentence in the background of the report, Welsh has always provided a management letter. So I was first thing I did was I went back and looked at a number of management letters from years past, and all of the ones that I saw usually just said, we identified nothing of which may be of interest to management. So that's why I was a little surprised to see this one. And certainly my hope is that everything will be rectified and straightened out and transparent, and that 2024 will be back to the normal. Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Christie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to say, I'm really glad to hear that the extra staff is helping, because I know a big project right now is the modernization. And with improving our software, there's a lot of things that will go from manual to automatic, and there's going to be a lot of efficiencies to be had. So I really want to thank you for your vision and for taking charge of all those efforts. And same with James, I'm sure that, in the future, we're going to just be going even better and having even better efficiency. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thanks for bringing this report forward. It's good to see that we've taken all their recommendations and used them to improve our efficiencies. And it's great to hear that, the increased staff, I should say, is helping with all of those efficiencies as well. And it was great to see the team in here today, already working on the 2024 audit, like I said, with all of these improvements and efficiency measures in place. Okay, so we'll receive that as information. Next up, we have FIN-03-2025, the January 2025 expenditure list, back on the agenda. Christine.
Yes. Again, I think in previous years where council saw this report, it was just the report itself and no kind of translation or summation for public consumption. I have kind of incorporated a report and provided some statistics in terms of number of checks, total dollar amount, average dollar, vendors, so on and so forth. Previous statistics that I've reported on a quarterly basis, so but this time just on a monthly basis. And I do want to call out to those eagle-eyed reviewers of the report that there may appear to be 5 checks that appear to be duplicated on the report. However, I do want to point out that sometimes our printer may jam and checks get maybe not shredded, but jammed in the printer. So we did need to cancel and reissue a few checks. So for example, there were checks for Superior Propane, for example, Amazon, Champion, and Templeman. So there's 5 checks total that were canceled, but then immediately reissued. So it's not a duplication or an error. It's actually the opposite. We were fixing a machine error and making sure our vendors were paid on time. So I'm happy to answer any other questions. But again, tried to kind of segue this with the previous report, as this is a recommendation. So you will be seeing me more often with this type of a report.
Questions on the expenditure? Deputy Mayor Sam.
Not a question, but it feels like an old friend has come back to my life with the detail, and combined with the summary, I think it's a very fulsome and transparent picture financially. So I'm really happy to see that, and thank you.
CAO.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we've also talked about those quarterly reports. We're going to move that schedule up, and once we get budget passed, Christine will be in front of you every 2 months as well, providing a financial outlook of where we are budget to actual. So you have rather than 4 times a year, it'll be every 2 months she'll be in front of you. We just felt that was a better pace and getting you more financial information as where we are standing on our spending. So yeah.
Further questions or comments? Yeah, it's great to see you back, and again, I love the vendor list as well. Rather than having to go through all of the thousands of checks and add up who we're paying the most, it's nice to have a list of the expenses we're paying to the major vendors. Okay, any other questions or comments? Then I need a motion to pay the bills. Moved by Deputy Mayor Savian, second by Councilor Roots, that check numbers 4489 to 4748 totaling $3,164,129.84 be approved by council. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Next we have FIN-04-2025, the 2025 interim taxes. Christine?
Last but not least, but hopefully the easiest for digestion, as this is a report and bylaw that's brought forward every year. So our interim tax bills every year are prescribed at 50% of 2024 taxes. So again, this is a legislative requirement in order for us to actually send out those bills, which will be sent out the first week of March, pending approval, of course, of the bylaw.
Questions on the report? If you're comfortable, then I need a motion. Moved by Councillor Coutu, second by Councillor Driscoll, that a bylaw be brought forward at a future meeting of council to approve the interim taxes payable for the 2025 fiscal year. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Nothing for general man. Oh, thank you, Christine. I'm just on a roll. Nothing for general matters. No, nothing for closed. I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Driscoll, seconded by Councillor Roots, that the meeting be adjourned at the call of the mayor. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried.